of us right now are just waiting for the next expansion to be announced any day now, and realistically, we actually have a bunch of hints. First is that we know for a fact that we're returning to Azeroth. There are some dragon talks that you probably heard about, but most importantly, there are some actual 9.2 PTR spoilers that talk about how we did defeat the Jailer, but he may have left a mark in the mechanism of the universe, which may be the beginning of a new cataclysm that would dwarf the shattering that was caused by Deathwing all those years ago. So what does all this stuff mean, and how would a new cataclysm on Azeroth play out? To get straight to the point and most important bit of information that we have are these 9.2 PTR spoilers that in my opinion have really gone under the radar. Barely anyone is really talking about it or even making videos, yet this might just be the most important information that we have learned throughout this entire expansion pretty much. So the quickest possible recap is that we are going into Zereth Mortis and we run into these brokers that have turned almost religious, the most important figure being one of the brokers called Firarim. Brokers are essentially the afterlife goblins, just greedy for information and would do anything for it, and they have been looking to enter Zereth Mortis since forever, searching for secrets, keys, whatever they can get their hands on. There was this expedition a long time ago that seemingly reached it, however everyone believed they were just lost and then it was just wild rumors that they actually succeeded. Well, they did, and they learned all about this realm, the Sepulchre, the Automa, and all this stuff. So what the core of this information is a series of in-game books that is essentially like a journal of Firarim. We learn everything from his arrival to learning the Automa language up to the ultimate defeat of the Jailer that is yet to happen. It's a pretty long list. There's a lot of stuff going on, so I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but let's get to the meat of the matter, and that is what he writes down after Zobel is defeated at the end of this expansion. He confirms that each cosmological force has a Zereth of its own, and that Zereth Mortis is just for death, and that it was the first ones that set this thing up so that their mechanism works flawlessly. Because according to the brokers, the primal state of the cosmos is chaos, and all the 6 cosmological forces were in opposition to each other. However, he states in the book that he is worried, even though we had defeated the Jailer, we managed to do it and stop his plan of breaking this mechanism, there is a thought in his head that he might have created some type of an imperceptible crack that might have went under the radar that will start an avalanche that no one in the universe would be able to stop. His only solace is that he hopes the first ones were smart enough and that they planned for this and set up a failsafe mechanism in case it reaches this point, but he isn't exactly all that hopeful. So let us step back and actually examine what this means, and trust me, this is a pretty big foreshadowing for what is to come in the future. Now, it is possible that this is just a false hint and Blizzard is known to do this, but I honestly doubt it, especially since we defeated the Jailer quite easily and he was painted as this crazy threat and we finished him in 2 patches, so it is more than likely that they're going the route of he isn't really the main threat, he just started the avalanche that we are yet to experience. And when you tie this in with the other details, and trust me there are many, this really makes total sense. So let us see what we have, and this is the actually interesting information. So the most obvious hint is that Blizzard confirmed that the next expansion will be Azeroth based with cosmological threats in the background. They essentially created cross factions recently, meaning we will fight united against big threats in the future and not each other, so that there won't be a war between the factions. Then they have some philosophical quotes from 9.2 that point at the light versus void conflict. Then to make this point even further, we have the official WoW website that talks about the Draenei leader Velen that believes it is just a matter of time before Azeroth becomes a battlefield between these 2 opposing forces. Then on top of all of that, we have the entire hints from the recent books with the moon and the sun, and Elune is obviously playing a pretty big role in the Shadowlands, and ultimately we also have this dragon stuff. So how can we really tie all of this together? Really, it is simple. All of this is ultimately related to Azeroth. Blizzard isn't even being vague. Azeroth literally seems to be the engine of this entire elaborate first one mechanism. The first ones seemingly ordered the chaotic universe and then created a bunch of cycles so that energy flows back and forth so that no force gets too powerful. Therefore, we have the life and death cycle, for example, which is apparently the most important out of all of them. However, if that broke, in my opinion, it would literally just be a free-for-all and the cosmological forces would grow disproportionately strong. Well, they essentially built the mechanism and then created these Zerets that are obviously working through Azerite, which is the blood of the World Soul, and we actually see this within the Sepulchre as there is a bunch of Azerite there. Now, the Jailer knew all about the inner workings of this and attempted to stop it and turn it all to his side. Of course, we still don't know how exactly, but in the final fight, he attacks Azeroth and we stop him. This now brings us to the thing Fareem the Broker talked about. Despite him being stopped, what if he started a process, made a leaking hole in the machinery that no one will be able to prevent from engulfing everything? This means that ultimately the first one mechanism will collapse, and that could be the definition of a cataclysm. Now, it is near impossible to speculate here because we don't know what the mechanism even is and how this would affect all of us, but we can imagine that it will be a pretty big deal. Remember all those years ago when Deathwing shattered like half of Azeroth? He did that by breaking the bond between the material plane and the elemental plane, which is literally a joke when compared to this, because the elemental plane is just a prison for the elementals built by the Titans. It is literally insignificant. Now, think about this. If the mechanism broke that is holding the entire universe together, these massive cycles, literally destroying the rules of the cosmos, well, I think the word cataclysm would just be putting it mildly. As more than likely, Azeroth is empowering this machinery, this would mean that the bond between the engine and the soul would break, so obviously the machine would stop working. This could further mean that this insanely powerful source that is Azeroth, our world soul, would be left vulnerable and now just might be up for grabs for every powerful cosmological force out there that is just battling for supremacy. Now, as recently we defeated the Legion and the Titans are also defeated, this ultimately means that we only really have a few crazy powerful forces, two of them being the Light and the Void, and this really brings us back to that Velen quote. Now, as Azeroth is tied to these Zerets, the breaking of them could mean a serious reshaping of the entire planet. That, on top of the new invasion from alien forces, would mean the world would just be completely different. As the Jailer stuff is quite recent, this could mean that it could happen right in the next expansion that we're waiting to be announced any day now. Now, with the strong dragon hints, this could of course be tied into this entire thing. For example, the Aspects getting their powers back in order to protect Azeroth in the most dire times of need, which could entail a whole bunch of dragon stuff from Isles to possibly even a playable race. So essentially, a Cataclysm 2.0 could get us all back on Azeroth, as they already confirmed will happen, and there could be huge cosmological threats we are fighting while still remaining on our planet. Additionally, this could mean that we get a whole bunch of revamped zones and half of Azeroth could get the visual treatment it really deserves, and the entire game could be updated. Now, while of course this would be incredibly cool, and the only thing that I'm really worried about and that I feel like it won't really happen is I'm kind of worried about how capable modern Blizzard really is to take such a huge undertaking as revamping the entire planet or creating another Cataclysm-like expansion. However, all the most recent hints are definitely pointing at this being 100% possible. Thank you for watching. Check out Could Galakrond be the next big villain by clicking on the screen, and check out the Notes Academy for videos on real world history. See you next time.